Have you ever felt like there's a weight on your shoulders even when no one else can see it? As if there's a silent expectation pushing you forward, yet crushing you at the same time. What does it truly mean to be a man? We live in an era where masculinity has become a topic of intense debate. On one side, extreme caricatures of the deconstructed man who rejects any form of responsibility. On the other, the image of the alpha male, turning life into a battlefield of status and domination. But what about those caught in between? Those who simply want to find their own path, free from empty labels and external impositions. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Perhaps this is one of masculinity's greatest ironies. Men are taught to be free, yet what they encounter throughout life are obligations, expectations, and responsibilities. There is an unspoken code that guides us, a set of silent rules handed down to us without warning. Work, protect, conquer, endure, stay quiet, move forward. But the real question is this code a legacy or a prison? If you're a man, you've probably felt this before. That moment when you realize you have no choice but to keep going, even when you're exhausted. When you understand that your pain isn't a priority because there's always something more urgent to handle. When you realize that weakness is not an option and that any sign of vulnerability might be seen as failure. Modern society looks at masculinity with suspicion. On one hand, it demands that men remain strong, productive, and unshakable. On the other, it mocks them whenever they show any trace of genuine emotion. Masculinity has become a minefield where every step can be judged as a mistake. But what no one told you is that this burden can be seen from a different perspective. And that's exactly what we're going to explore together. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down what it truly means to be a man. We'll talk about strength and sacrifice, loneliness and friendship, the silence of emotions, and the path to a healthy masculinity. It doesn't matter if you've reflected on this before or if these words are awakening something new inside you. What matters is that we're here together, ready to face this truth. So if you feel like you're carrying an invisible weight, if you've ever questioned whether you're on the right path, if you've ever felt like you had to be strong all the time, then this video is for you. Since an early age, what it means to be a man is never clearly explained to us. We learn by observation, through silent examples, through unspoken expectations. We grow up hearing phrases like swallow your tears, real men don't complain, be strong, but no one ever asks us how we feel when we hear them. Masculinity, in many cultures, is not taught. It is imposed. A boy's childhood already carries an invisible destiny. From an early age, we are conditioned to understand that our worth is tied to what we offer the world. A man is, above all, a provider. He must ensure security, livelihood, structure. He must lead, protect, endure. But what happens when this role becomes a burden? What happens when it turns into a prison? There is an almost tragic romanticism in the masculine archetype. The lone hero, the warrior who endures everything in silence, the father who sacrifices his happiness for the good of others. Society has shaped men to be unshakable pillars, but it has never stopped to ask, how long can they hold? Male sacrifice is seen as something natural, almost expected, and it often goes unnoticed. Masculinity, in its essence, holds undeniable strength. It has built civilizations, raised empires, and faced dangers to ensure the survival of our species. But there is also a darker side to this story. Men have learned to measure their worth by the pain they endure, by their ability to keep going even when they are falling apart inside, by the silence they carry, by the suffering they bury. How many fathers have sacrificed their health to provide for their families? How many sons have given up their dreams to follow a path they never chose? How many men live only to fulfill a role they never had the chance to question? Healthy masculinity should not be about carrying the entire world on your shoulders without complaint, yet somehow that is the only version we have been shown. And maybe that's why so many men feel like something is missing. Strength without purpose becomes a burden. Sacrifice without recognition turns into resentment. The problem is that the world doesn't stop to ask if a man is okay. No one asks the provider if he needs anything. No one worries about the one who is always taught to give without expecting anything in return. And when he finally reaches his limit, when his strength is depleted, all he hears is, "What happened? I always thought you were stronger than this." There is a fine line between resilience and self-destruction. And it is on this line that most men walk every day, never able to stop. Not because they want to, but because they never learned another way to exist. From the moment a boy begins to understand the world around him, he realizes that his worth must be earned. Respect, admiration, even love, everything seems to be conditional on what he can offer. Unlike femininity, which is often recognized as something intrinsic, masculinity must be proven. And the problem is that this test never ends. We live in a world where men are constantly measured by what they do, what they own, and what they achieve. Simply existing is not enough. One must stand out, show strength, talent, ambition. One must win. From childhood, the comparisons begin. Who runs faster? Who is stronger? Who gets more attention? Over time, this turns into another kind of competition. Who makes more money? Who has more influence? Who leads the most impressive life? Society tells men they must be leaders, winners, dominant figures. But what happens to those who don't succeed? What happens to ordinary men who don't fit into these unattainable standards of success? The truth is, no one talks about them. They become invisible. If a man has nothing to show for himself, nothing to offer, he feels like he has no value at all. And that is precisely when loneliness begins to grow. Male competition is not just a race for status, it is also a wall that separates men from one another. From an early age, we are taught to see others as rivals. No wonder that so often a man's first instinct when meeting another man is not curiosity or friendship, but suspicion. We measure strength without even realizing it. We assess who is on top and who is beneath. Male camaraderie exists, but it is often surrounded by an invisible barrier, the fear of showing any sign of weakness. How many men can truly open up about their fears to their friends? How many can admit they feel lost? That they feel like failures? How many feel safe enough to say they are tired of fighting? Very few. Because in the game of masculinity, revealing vulnerability is opening a crack, and opening a crack means becoming a target. The result of this is an army of men pretending to be fine, men who uphold a facade of confidence, control, and stability. But inside, they live in isolation. How many men sit in silence in their own homes, staring into the void, with no one to hear their thoughts? How many drink alone to drown a burden they can never share? How many fight daily against the exhaustion of maintaining an image that was never real? And then comes the big question. Is it worth it? Is it worth living in a constant state of proving oneself, where the only reward is the permission to keep existing? Must a man's life be an endless battlefield, where the only relief is the exhaustion at the end of the day? Male loneliness is not a coincidence. It is the consequence of a system that taught us we must always win, that we must always be strong, that any deviation from this is failure. But what no one told us is that many times the greatest act of courage is not winning, it's choosing to stop fighting battles that were never ours to begin with. And that is where we begin to question the silence. What happens when a man carries a burden for too long without ever putting it down? What happens when he learns, from an early age, that his pain doesn't matter, that his fears must be silenced, that his suffering cannot be shown? The result isn't just silence, it's erasure. Masculinity has always had an invisible pact with silence. Society has never wanted to hear about men's pain. There is no space for it. The narrative has always been clear. Endure and move forward. If something hurts, ignore it. If something wounds you, swallow it. If something scares you, hide it. A man's life is more often than not a long exercise in denial. And at first, it seems to work. Even in childhood, a boy learns that crying solves nothing. He learns that expressing emotions can be seen as weakness. He learns that no one will come to rescue him if he falls. So, he swallows his tears, takes a deep breath, clenches his fists, moves on. In adolescence, he realizes he no longer knows how to express what he feels. When something hurts him, his first reaction is to shut down. When something frustrates him, he responds with anger, never sadness. Because anger is acceptable. Anger is masculine. Sadness is not. By adulthood, silence has become a part of him. He doesn't cry. He doesn't ask for help. He doesn't tell anyone what he's going through. Even on the hardest days, the only answer he can give when asked if he's okay is, "Yeah, I'm fine," even when he's not. The modern man is an emotional survivor. He walks through his own existence numb, unaware of what he has lost along the way. But the truth is, the body never forgets. Silence comes at a cost. It manifests as stress, anxiety, insomnia. It manifests as the persistent tightness in his chest, the exhaustion that never fades, the constant irritation. It manifests as both physical and mental illness, because the pain that has no way out turns against the one who carries it. And this is where loneliness becomes dangerous. Because a man who has never learned to talk about his emotions doesn't know how to ask for help. He may be falling apart inside and still choose silence over vulnerability. He may be on the verge of collapse and yet pretend that everything is under control. The world was not designed to embrace male pain, and so men have learned to hide it. The result is clear. Suicide rates among men are alarming. So are the rates of depression and substance abuse. But when a man self-destructs in silence, the world simply moves on. There are no marches, no protests, no public outcry. All that remains is a brief remark, "Wow, But he seems so fine, and that might be the cruelest part, because male silence is not just a choice, it's a sentence. But what if there was another way? What if a man could learn to say, "I need help," without feeling ashamed? What if he could admit that he is afraid without it diminishing his worth? What if he could simply exist without carrying the weight of the world alone? Maybe this is the real challenge for the modern man, not proving his strength, but accepting that being human also means being vulnerable. And that leads us to the next step on this journey: reconnecting with oneself and finding a path to a healthier masculinity. For so long, men have been taught to look outside themselves, to measure their worth by what they achieve, what they endure, and what they can offer the world. But they were never taught to look inward. No one ever told them that they too need something beyond work, beyond responsibility, beyond resilience. No one ever told them that they too deserve peace. The problem is that modern life doesn't make this journey easy. Masculinity has always been shaped by doing, building, and providing. But what happens when a man sits in silence and asks himself, "Who am I beyond what I do?" The answer often comes as a terrifying void, because for decades his identity has been defined by external obligations, and if those obligations disappear, what remains? This is a question that haunts many men, especially those who, after years of fulfilling a role, realize they no longer know who they are outside of it. It's the successful businessman who, upon reaching the top, realizes he never asked himself what he truly wanted from life. It's the devoted father who, as his children grow up, realizes he never created a space for himself. It's the everyday man who, after decades of effort, realizes he never allowed himself to feel. And the answer to this crisis doesn't lie in yet another external goal, but in something many avoid: reconnecting with themselves. But how does a man do that? How does he learn to listen to himself when he spent his entire life ignoring his own voice? How does he learn to feel when emotions have always been seen as a risk? How does he learn to simply be when he's been taught that his worth lies in doing? The first step is simple, yet difficult: pause. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibilities or giving up on his dreams, but it does mean, for the first time, allowing himself to stop. It means finding moments where the pressure of the world doesn't reach him, where he can, without fear, look inward and ask himself, "What do I truly want?" The second step is to redefine the idea of strength. Healthy masculinity is not about hardening oneself until breaking, but about learning to bend without losing one's essence. Strength is not just about resisting, it's about knowing when to let go. It's not just about protecting others, it's about learning to protect oneself too. And perhaps the most important step is understanding that he doesn't have to do this alone. Male loneliness is one of the biggest sources of suffering in the modern world, but the truth is, no one builds a healthy path in isolation. Men need other men, not to compete, not to measure strength, but to share the journey, to learn together that being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. Throughout history, rites of passage have always existed to mark the transition from boyhood to manhood. But in modern society, these rituals have disappeared. Today, each man must build his own path to maturity, and the only way to do that is by allowing himself to feel, to question, to make mistakes, to be human. Masculinity was never the problem. The problem was what was done with it. But that can change, and that change begins when each man decides for himself to find a path that is not a prison, but a choice. Because being a man should not be a burden. It should be an authentic expression of who one truly is. And that brings us to the final question. What does it truly mean to be a man? What does it really mean to be a man? This question has haunted generations. It has been answered in different ways throughout history, but there has never been a single definitive answer. Maybe that's because masculinity isn't something fixed, unchanging, carved in stone. Maybe it's because being a man isn't a predetermined destination, but a journey in constant evolution. For centuries, we were told that being a man meant being strong. We were taught that it was about sacrifice, about carrying responsibilities, about proving our worth. We were made to believe that we had to bear the weight of the world without ever complaining, without ever hesitating, without ever stopping to ask, "What about me?" But what if being a man is more than that? What if it's not just about what we can offer the world, but also what we can offer ourselves? What if true masculinity isn't found in silence, blind resilience, or endless competition, but in the courage to be whole? Healthy masculinity isn't about denying strength, but understanding that strength doesn't mean hardening until we break. It's not about avoiding vulnerability, but about finding a balance between power and sensitivity. It's not about following an imposed role, but about creating your own meaning. And what were we taught about that meaning? That it comes down to protecting, providing, conquering. But does a man have to go through life as a machine of sacrifice, as a solitary pillar, as a warrior who can never lower his sword? Or can he allow himself to be something more? Maybe being a man isn't just about winning, but about learning to lose without losing yourself. Maybe it's about having the courage to face your own pain instead of ignoring it. Maybe it's about connecting with the world without fearing being seen. Maybe it's about knowing when to fight and when to let go. The world has always tried to define what it means to be a man. But maybe the greatest challenge of all is making that definition something personal, something that doesn't come from the outside, but from within, something that isn't an unbearable weight, but an authentic expression of who we are. And now I ask you, what does it mean to be a free man to you? If you've made it this far, I want you to know this video wasn't made just to inform you. It was made so you could feel seen, because deep down, all of us at some point have carried this weight. We've felt suffocated by expectations, questioned whether we're on the right path, and pretended everything was fine when, in reality, it wasn't. But you don't have to carry this alone. The burden of masculinity is only unbearable when it's carried in silence, when we believe there's no room for doubts, weaknesses, or humanity. But the truth is, there is. And there always has been. Maybe that's the biggest lesson. You don't have to be an unshakable rock to be strong. You don't have to prove anything to anyone to have value. You don't have to follow a script that doesn't make sense to you. Masculinity is not a prison. It can be a conscious choice. And if this video resonated with you, if something here connected with your story, I want to ask you for a favor. Don't keep this to yourself. Share in the comments what this topic means to you. Have you ever felt this weight? Have you ever tried to define for yourself what it means to be a man? Your story might be the one another man needs to hear to realize he's not alone. And of course, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video. You know how YouTube works. If you don't engage, this content disappears into the algorithm. So if you think more people need to hear this, help spread the message. And if you want to continue this journey, there's a video on your screen right now. I could tell you about it, but I'd rather let you discover it for yourself. After all, some answers only make sense when we choose to seek them on our own. See you there.